the capital of Scotland, fires and age-old history. But Edinburgh is also rumoured to be one of Britain's most haunted cities. Seek eternal solitude. Others return to wreak havoc and vengeance.
There are many reasons why Edinburgh had a reputation, or has a reputation.
A long, long history in Edinburgh, and a lot of very strange things happening. Everywhere you go, there's a ghost somewhere.
People from all over, there's something going on down here, and yes, it does scare me.
Edinburgh has a rich but troubled legacy, pride since the Bronze Age, but took shape during the 11th century.
I think Edinburgh is regarded as haunted because that building's old. It's bound to have lots of stories attached to it, good ones, bad ones.
Holyrood Palace is one of the impressive structures still standing, but some say former monarchs still haunt the royal residence. The name Holyrood, meaning Holy Cross, when an aggressive stag knocked him off his horse. The beast charged at him. Hawk's life was spared. The pious king constructed the Holyrood Abbey to pay homage to the symbolic cross in the palatial estate, including Scotland's beloved Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was a beautiful and clever ruler, but the
This is a very difficult time, as the Reformation in Europe had swept right across Britain and including Scotland. Mary was very young when she came to the throne, and
Queen Mary married Henry Lord Darnley, a younger man known more for his dashing looks than his intelligence. Darnley suspected his wife was having an affair with Rizzio and plotted his demise. A group of assassins led by the jealous Lord Darnley charged the palace. Rizzio was seized and dragged, left a grim legacy at Holyrood. Visitors to the palace have developed unexplainable headaches in the room where it is believed he was murdered.
Edinburgh going round about the palace, but in fact the spot where David Rizzio was murdered, there was a bloodstain on the floor, which no matter how people tried just couldn't be washed off.
The air, and the sound of footsteps when no one was around. Could this have been the ghost of David Rizzio? Mary feared for her own life. In 1567, when Lord Darnley was found strangled to death, the Queen became a suspect.
More unpopular, and sections of Scottish society then rose against her. She was imprisoned, and she had abdicated while she was in prison.
But Elizabeth, a staunch Protestant, feared that Mary might be a danger to her throne due to numerous Catholic uprisings. Mary, Scottish Queen, was beheaded in a castle located in Northampton, England. The tragic heroine
Ghost Stories involves a grey lady in the picture gallery, and this has been identified by some as the ghost of Mary, Queen of Scots.
The fortress was built on top of a non-active volcano and was the monarchy's residence from the 6th century until 1603.
You would find passageways, cellars that people didn't know existed from previous buildings, and I think that probably brought in an aurora of
Some time that one secret underground passageway extended from Edinburgh Castle to Holyrood Palace, almost a mile away. The tunnel was sent down to the basement of Edinburgh Castle to see if this passageway actually stretched to Holyrood.
The idea being that as these pipes were playing, and as I said from time to time now, that the sounds of pipes can still be heard from this poor man who got lost in the tunnels.
The bagpipers
in the middle of the night, in the still Edinburgh night, in the darks of winter, could still be heard the ghostly strains of a phantom piper.
So now curious to visit the places where strange sightings have been reported. But a cemetery in the heart of Edinburgh has become a place to beware. The graveyards are typically places where the dead rest in peace. But at Greyfriars Kirk Cemetery in Edinburgh, the deceased souls are anything but unexplained episodes have led many to believe that the grounds are haunted by a vindictive poltergeist, an unworldly predator who assaults those who trespass through the seven kingdoms on the island of Britain, were in conflict with each other for hundreds of years. During the 13th and 14th centuries, England invaded Scotland, the Bruce. 300 years later, in 1603, the two countries united in what was called the Union of the Crowns.
Formation in Scotland in the mid-16th century, there was much conflict between those who wanted to keep the old church, the Roman Catholic Church, and those who wanted a Protestant
group, rejected the Episcopalian views of King Charles I of England and Scotland. They raised a fierce army to defend their traditional religious beliefs. 100 Covenanters were imprisoned within Greyfriars churchyard without food and water for nearly 5 months. Kenzie sentenced hundreds of Covenanters to death by hanging. Many were buried at the Covenant. Most of the ghosts are said to be docile creatures. But over the last year, a sinister spirit has apparently emerged from the dead.
Because the first basically attacks people, and that's why we think it's not a ghost, because ghosts in legend don't do that. Poltergeist lore, however, is all about
Greyfriars Cemetery since 1999. Although he's never personally been attacked, he has witnessed tourists being viciously mauled by what he believes is an
literally for hundreds of years, and nothing ever happened to people in there. They used to wander in and out with impunity, and it's only in the last maybe year and a half that these attacks have started. As soon as they get to the doorway, down they go, and they'll just collapse. They normally stay unconscious for 2-3 minutes.
Who reported deep cuts and bruises on their face and hands.
My first impression was it was very interesting, and I was inside this vault, and I felt as though someone was touching the back of my head. I looked around to see if anyone was there. There was no one, because they were all standing away from me. I started to feel very, very sick and nauseated. It just rose up suddenly. I couldn't explain why. I thought I was either going to be sick or faint. It was so cold that I couldn't feel my fingers touching it. And that sensation must have lasted for about 15-20 minutes before the feeling, I don't know, that's changed my mind. Very much so. But I wouldn't like to come back by myself.
Someone's types of hormones when they're scared, and that's why a poltergeist wants to scare you. I don't know, feeds on it and makes it stronger, and we think that's the reason that sort of children 11 or 12 on the chair than any other time. And I've been in there lots and lots of times and nothing's happened to me. So, I'm really
to the religious persecution that occurred centuries ago. But the medieval cemetery is not the only place where the tortured have allegedly returned to torment the living. The ghostly figure of a fanatical preacher who was sentenced to death for practicing witchcraft and sorcery. The 17th century was a time of greatness and the execution of thousands. Major Thomas Weir was one of the victims. Weir, a former soldier, was a religious zealot. He never knelt in church and smelled of brimstone. He also carried a twisted stick that he claimed acted. Weir and his elder sister, Grizzle, secretly practiced witchcraft in the home they shared.
Thomas Weir confessed with other women, even bestiality. He didn't confess to harming anyone, which was also unusual in itself. Because it was such a shock for this burying, to say that he must be having some mental breakdown, perhaps he was mentally disturbed.
But doctors diagnosed Weir as sane, sentenced to death, burned at the stake along with his twisted stick. Many claimed that Satan himself came to Edinburgh.
When she was being executed, she took off her clothes. She made quite a spectacle of herself on the episode at the time.
The Weir's home became one of the most haunted places in Edinburgh. It was torn down in 1830, but witnesses have testified seeing a Weir's twisted stick on the cobbled streets of the city. The ghost of Thomas Weir has become a famous Scottish legend, a doorway that leads to an endless world of spirits and ghosts. Visitor life. Roslin Chapel, 7 miles south of Edinburgh, is believed to contain an invisible doorway leading to the Earl of Orkney. Some speculate the ornate chapel was modeled after King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. True believers in the supernatural have made pilgrimages to Roslin to test its powers. Them on many of their assignments.
We investigate basically any kind of phenomena in these investigations. I mean, everything from UFOs to presence in the place as well, spiritual energy as well. It's almost like a meeting point of energies, different energies. I mean, the whole place is just buzzing.
The field strength on the meter increases when spirits are present.
We also have temperature readings, because occasionally there's always a...
This way, the power was incredible. The sense of presence of it being there. I mean, I ain't no lightweight guy, and I mean, I was literally off the floor. Must have been half an inch off.
A tremendous feeling as well. So the place is actually moving.
The psychics have often made contact with the Templar Knight.
There seems to be some sort of activities being taking place. Someone else has discovered
an entranceway where the dead and living can be transported back and forth in time.
We discovered there's an astral doorway. Well, if you can imagine, there's a big tube here, and it allows you to go to different astral dimensions.
It's a bit like stepping through a stargate, you know.
Anne-Marie and Jim. But they hope this portal will open one day so they can visit the souls who have passed on.
The reason the astral doorway is spiritual can go through from both directions, good and bad, exactly.
It can all be opened by a certain way, some kind of a ceremony or some kind of meditation.
Investigators believe they are on the brink of discovering the ultimate gateway to the spiritual world. But Roslin Chapel is only one of several places said to be inhabited by Edinburgh is a picturesque city, bustling with underground slum, a spine-chilling place with a dismal past. These hidden passageways are said to be haunted by those who once lived in a cave life. The origins of this underground metropolis began in the 1600s when a massive wall was built around Edinburgh to protect its citizens from foreign invasions, teeming with poverty and crime.
Edinburgh has a history of being a haunted city. I would say basically because of...
Abandoned in the 18th century. But many believe wicked spirits still wander through the maze of dark and damp hallways.
This is workshops and houses and storage areas for shops and businesses up on the South Bridge. And they were discovered in the 1980s and gradually more and more things began to happen. This room, we believe, was used as a cobbler's workshop.
A terrifying ghost called the Mad Woman is one of the most frequently cited apparitions in the cobbler's room. She is said to...
that something terrible happened to her. She lost a child, or her husband had fathered a child by another woman, or she had a miscarriage. Power struggle going on with the ghosts in here, the good ones and the bad ones. There have been many experiences had by people and who speaks to them and whispers in their ear. His main characteristic is that he wears a pair of big black leather boots and he stomps.
Landlord who charged too much rent to his tenants. Some speculate he scares away those who trespass on his property.
We had a young lady, we were walking up the corridor and Emma just stopped dead in her tracks. And she said she had met Mr. Boots, this very unpleasant character, standing in the corridor. Experience for everybody, that one.
The vaults are only a portion of Edinburgh's haunted underground city. Several blocks away, called closes were built around the city during the 17th century. Mary King's Close was one of the streets. No one knows who Mary King was who visit the underground road each year.
Mary King's Close now is probably the most famous haunted site anywhere. It was densely packed in, living literally on top of each other.
Mary King's Close was a prosperous, bustling street until the great were trapped and left to die. Edinburgh lost 10,000 souls, many of whom lived along Mary King's Close.
Windows and I'm together with palpitating hearts.
Mary King's Close remained derelict and desolate until the mid-80s. Apparitions have attracted tourists from around the world.
The contrast with the street we were just standing in couldn't be clearer. This is Mary King's Close. Tours have unusual experiences. People have set foot at the very bottom of the close and within minutes have turned and fled. Others have burst into tears.
Many visitors claim to see a tall lady dressed in black drifting through basement corridors. Some speculate she is Mary King, for whom the street was named.
Bodies. Perhaps the room was used as a temporary morgue. People have seen limbs bloated with the same symptoms of the plague. The skin cracked.
Close. Many believe the child was abandoned by her parents and left to die during the epidemic.
There was a film crew from Japan, the city of Edinburgh. The lady that accompanied them, a well-known psychic, she saw a little girl, about 8 years old, wearing ragged of making them rest at peace. And that lady placed in the window in Annie's room a small doll wearing a tartan skirt, lamenting her the sad figure that she once was. That's known as Annie's room. Here you can see the many things that have been left to the memory where Annie was first recorded. Is the doll left as a gift to her.
In June of 2000, 2 students from Edinburgh spent the night videotape recorded during their overnight stay.
This is one of the most scariest places in this whole place, the whole underground thing.
The fearless duo believe they captured several strange phenomena on videotape, including eerie sounds.
We'll just have... Oh, shall we not take a look at it?
The students take this scene in Annie's room. They believe they captured the shadowy image.
I see far more now than I did when I first started, about 5 years ago, taking people through Mary King's Close in the underground vaults. So many strange things have occurred. Perhaps, and felt a very, very heavy hand land on my shoulder. And putting it politely, it wrenched the thing out of its socket. I didn't mention this to anyone for fear.
But the famous street is not the only place that terrifies visitors. A 13th century Scottish castle-turned-hotel is another site where a rich tradition of Scottish heritage and hospitality. It also stands as a reminder of the chilling incidents that happened within its stone walls. The fortress was defended against foreign invasions by many of Ramsay's descendants, including William Ramsay, who for years the family owned the castle. Hundreds of years later, in 1974, Dalhousie was converted into a hotel, the most commonly seen apparition in the castle. She was the wealthy daughter of one of the owners who lived there during the late 1600s. Catherine, for a year. Alone and neglected, she eventually died of starvation. Today, many believe Lady Catherine has returned.
Walked the corridors to the rear of the castle, and that is where I first met with her. It was not a frightening experience, it was unusual. And as I talked to her...
A canine ghost has also been seen and heard throughout Dalhousie. In the 1980s, a dog named Petra has been seen running up the stairs and along corridors. Visitors have also heard the pattering of his paws. Inhabitant of the castle.
In September 97, as recent as that, I came down about 8 o'clock in the morning, and in the corridor, well, in fact the corridor was actually watched the night before, and they weren't the normal size, they were very close together, like a sort of shuffle.
Many stories about
experiences that they've had in the castle. I've only experienced one experience behind the chapel. I was serving drinks and it was just gently being pulled until it was actually, my hair bobble was taken out of my head, which gave me an awful fright. And I've been in different parts of the castle and I can feel a presence, although I haven't seen anything. I always feel there's someone there watching.
Another is roaming through the dining room. Some speculate he was a former employee who had returned to serve the new owner. Explained sightings at Dalhousie continue to baffle the staff and guests. The haunted castle symbolizes the mystical powers that many feel exist in Edinburgh. Executions have disappeared from this now storybook setting. But the tales and legends of ghosts will always be a part of Edinburgh, Scotland.
Just because we can't prove it's there doesn't mean to say that it doesn't exist.
I don't know about any of the scientific evidence about it at all. I think it's very hard.
And I'm sure Edinburgh has more than its fair amount of them.